So, Chapter 7 talks all about microbial nutrition. Specifically, we're talking really about bacteria, but it also could apply to fungi, algae, protozoa. So, we're going to focus on the nutrition, the different environments that microbes can be found in, and then at the end, we're going to talk about the growth curve, which is one of the most essential ways that we measure how microbes grow and the stages they use to grow. This first video is kind of boring. It's kind of just like vocabulary that you probably have heard before, but there's also some you might have not heard before, so we should just go through it real quick. So first of all microbes need elements like that are on the periodic table of elements. And all life uses almost the same elements. The majority of the elements in our bodies and in microbes are just six. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And you can see this spells CHONPS or chomps. That's how I always remember. Those are the six main elements of life. But also inside of our bodies, we have some things called trace elements. So trace elements are elements that are found in very small quantities inside the cell. So for example, calcium, iron, sodium, chlorine, magnesium. Okay, these things are found in the body, but very small quantities compared to these other six main ones. An essential nutrient is a nutrient that the organism needs to get from their food. Okay, so for example, us humans, we need to eat several macronutrients during the day. For us, our macros, and for all life, macros include the carbohydrates, carbs, proteins, lipids. Okay, these are our main macronutrients we get in our body. Now, there is a fourth class of macronutrient. That is the nucleic acids. Nucleic acids include DNA and RNA, but we actually will eat nutrients we get in our food, like phosphorus, nitrogen that we get in our food, actually are the building blocks of the nucleic acids. And then, of course, micronutrients, indicating you need smaller amounts of them. You don't need to like overload on these things. But micronutrients include vitamins and minerals, which we get for the most part in our diet. And same with microorganisms, okay? All living things need food, macronutrients and micronutrients. Whenever you see the word organic nutrient, this does not mean something that they sold at Whole Foods. Okay, organic nutrient simply means any molecule that contains carbon. It has to have carbon in it, and it has to have hydrogen in it. It can have other elements, but it has to have, at the bare minimum, carbon and hydrogen. So organic nutrients include those carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids I told you about. A lot of living organisms, almost all of them, need some sort of organic nutrient, including us humans. Inorganic nutrients. These are nutrients that contain other things, not carbon or hydrogen. Okay, such as metals, iron, okay, is an inorganic nutrient. Salts, carbon dioxide and oxygen and water are all inorganic nutrients. So like I told you before, all cells, they consist of a lot of water, you know this. Most cells consist of these six main elements I told you about. About 96% of our cell is made up of these simple six elements, and the organic compounds are what makes up most of the weight of the cell. Now, cells need to take in food in order to make up more cell components and make up more cell membrane and make proteins. And all of this food is essential to the survival of the cell. So for example, us humans, we need to consume a certain number of vitamins in our diet every day in order to sustain life. Microbes are the same way, okay? Some microbes can actually produce all of the amino acids that they need to inside of their cell, while others require certain amino acids or certain vitamins from their food, from the outside source. So if a microorganism must be supplied a specific nutrient, this is called a growth factor. So growth factor is basically a nutrient that's required in the diet in order for the microbe to grow. Okay, such as an essential amino acid or a vitamin, like I mentioned. Some organisms require more growth factors than others. So for example, E. coli is so non-picky. It'll grow just on just about anything, and it's fine. It can make all of its amino acids, and it's not very picky at all. But some microorganisms are what we call fastidious, and you'll see this word. So fastidious means it requires growth factors, maybe one growth factor or maybe a lot. All right, so for example, Streptococcus, which actually causes strep throat amongst many other diseases, is a fastidious microbe. There are some microbes that really require blood in order to grow. So we'd have to grow them on blood agar if we want to grow them in the lab. These type of microbes, again, these are fastidious. They require a lot of growth factors in their media. Now, all living organisms need a couple things in terms of nutrients. We all need a carbon source. Because remember, carbon is one of those 6 main elements of life, and carbon is really the building block of all of our macromolecules, our proteins, our lipids, our nucleic acids, our carbs. Carbon is so important, okay? There's 2 different places where an organism could obtain carbon. The first, an organism may be able to obtain carbon from carbon dioxide, CO2, in the atmosphere. Not a lot of organisms actually have this ability, but if they do, we call them autotrophs. Auto means self. Troph means nutrient, to eat. It's think about like a pig, it's eating at the trough, it's getting nutrients. So troph is consuming. So autotrophs can consume carbon by themselves by fixing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Okay, so for example, we know plants can do this. Plants can pick up CO2 from the atmosphere. Algae. There's also some bacteria that can do this. Humans, unfortunately, we're not very efficient. We really can't do this. We rely on plants and bacteria and other life to do this for us. So us humans, we fit into the second category. We're heterotrophs. So a heterotroph needs to get their carbon from their food or by eating organic compounds, really, okay, by eating other plants and other animals that are rich in those carbohydrates and those lipids and those proteins. We can get the carbon from there. Okay, so either organism could be autotrophic or heterotrophic. CO2 from the atmosphere or carbon from that we have to break down from the food we eat. Now, in addition to carbon, the other thing we all need, is an energy source. We need some sort of source that's going to allow our bodies to make ATP, to make energy. So there's a few different groups here as well. The first type is called a phototroph. So just like it sounds, photo means light. So phototrophs can extract energy from the sunlight. And we know examples of these include, again, the plants, algae, and we've talked before about the cyanobacteria, the bacteria that are capable of photosynthesis. Now, the second way that organism could achieve energy, they could be what's called a chemotroph. Chemotrophs, chemo means chemical, so chemotrophs, they get energy from their food, from organic or inorganic food they eat. So there's a couple different classes of chemotrophs. We can have a chemoorganotroph or an organotroph. So chemoorganotrophs, they need to get their energy from eating organic molecules, such as carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. Obviously, us humans fit into this category. Okay, we are chemoorganotrophs. Also, most bacteria, especially bacteria that live in the human body, okay, they also eat the same food we eat because a lot of them are living in our gut. So many bacteria, especially pathogens, and even normal flora in your body fit into this category. The second category is a chemolithotroph, or you may see them just called lithotrophs. So a lithotroph gets its energy from eating inorganic compounds. So for example, there are some bacteria out there that actually can eat or breathe metals. There's some bacteria out there that may eat some sulfur-containing compounds. So these organisms are eating inorganic things that don't contain only carbon or hydrogen. So now that we have these different carbon sources and energy sources, we can kind of fuse these things together. So for example, photoautotrophs, okay? They get their energy from sun. They get their carbon, remember autotroph, they get their carbon from CO2 in the atmosphere. So we combine those two things together. And even from there, they can get broken down into several groups. So for example, there can be oxygenic photoautotrophs. These are the organisms that produce oxygen via photosynthesis, such as plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. There also is anoxygenic photosynthesizers, meaning they don't produce oxygen when they do photosynthesis. There's a group called the purple and green sulfur bacteria. These are a really unique kind of extremophilic bacteria. They do photosynthesis, so they use sun and they use carbon dioxide, but they don't produce oxygen. Instead, they produce sulfur. Again, we could have a chemolithoautotroph. Okay, so again, an organism that uses inorganic compounds for energy. And autotroph means that they use carbon dioxide as a carbon source. One group of these weird lithoautotrophs are called methanogens. Methanogens can actually consume as food. They can use things like hydrogen, acetate, methanol. So they can use these weird compounds as their food source. And then they actually release methane gas, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. They actually release that as a waste product into the environment. So you can see there's like such a wide range of metabolism that microbes can use. Lastly, we have those chemoheterotrophs I talked about. These ones are going to use organic molecules as both their energy source and their hetero. So that means they also use organic molecules for a carbon source. Like I mentioned, most human body bacteria that we think about fit into this group. There's two kind of general categories of these. You could have a saprobe. Usually whenever you see saprobe, you think of something that's like a decomposer, like a fungus or a bacteria that's able to extract nutrients from like dead or decaying matter. Or you could have a parasite, which generally refers to something that's eating nutrients directly from its host.